We just wanted to get something on the air that stuck. We just wanted to have a hit show that we were proud of, and that was our business plan.
They came into my office one day and said, we're going to do another show. Who you got? Like I was in the grocery business. So I started to go through names, and I said, Bill Cosby, I think we'll do a show.
We adored Bill Cosby as viewers, as people who would know him through his comedy albums and who watched his brilliant career.
Oh, we love Cosby. I said, but he wants a lot of money. I don't know how you can afford him in a half hour. That's why I'm talking about doing an hour show with him. You know how much money? And I tell him it was a lot of money.
They said that it was possible, not necessarily probable, but possible that Bill might be entertaining the idea of doing a series.
And next thing we know, they love the idea, and we're going to go have dinner at Cosby's house.
He wasn't looking to do something, but we were just so enthused about the possibility of working with him that they asked us if we could get together with Bill, and that was the start of it. But it was a very tortured birth. It wasn't something that happened based on one meeting.
People were talking about sitcoms were dead because the only reason they were saying they were dead because they weren't working. The particular shows were not working. So there would seem to be a rush by the networks to let's just do hour shows and dramas. Well, you can't have a schedule with just hour shows. And the reason they weren't working, the shows weren't good enough. So there was a fear and a concern about putting half hours on.
We basically talked to Bill about doing what he was talking about in his monologues, about taking that point of view and putting it into a half-hour comedy form.
And along came Cosby and disproved the concern and brought back the sitcom to life. So that was a turning point.
There was a moment during the taping where there was a scene where Bill was talking to his son, Theo, played by Malcolm Jamal Warner. And the scene was about, Theo was saying, I just want to be regular people. You and Mom, you're professionals, you're a doctor, she's a lawyer. I'm not that, Dad. I'm just a regular person, and you and Mom just have to love me for what I am. I'm just a regular person. That sounded very much like what half-hour comedies were in those days. I mean, the children always knew more than the parents.
And we did it in the afternoon, and the kid does this speech about, why can't you just love me for me? Why do I have to be successful? I'm a person, blah, blah, blah. And I don't have to get the best grades. I don't have to do this and that. And at the end, Bill says, that is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Well, the afternoon audience, which was basically kids, applauded when, at the end of Theo's speech, why can't you just love me for me? The evening audience burst into applause when Bill says that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
They stood up, they applauded, they whooped, they went, whoa, because they hadn't heard that before. They hadn't heard the parents taking the household back and the parents saying, you know what, I'm right and you're wrong. To the extent that Jay Sanders, the director, said, okay, who turned on that applause sign? He got furious. He thought somebody had turned the applause sign, and we went, we didn't do it,
Just, it was amazing. Every line worked so well.
So at that moment, I think we knew that we had a hit.
It was marvelous, and Cosby was very involved.
He was looking at the quality of the script as he was considering, to the smallest detail, anything that was on our set. Paying attention to the music, paying attention to how we were dressed. He paid attention to everything. He was visionary, and he's spontaneous. He's spontaneous in his thinking, and so spontaneous in his action on set.
As a director, I'd say to Bill, why don't you try so-and-so? And he'd say, yeah, great. And he'd go out and do it or not do it. If he didn't want to do it, he wouldn't do it. If he wanted to do it, he'd do it,
It's like jazz, You know the melody, you know the chord structure, you know the basic timing, you know the rhythm, play.
I mean, it's Bill Cosby. I'm not going to tell him how to act.
Well, this proved a little more than a little disconcerting to our director, Jay Sandrich, who had been the director on the Mary Tyler Moore Show, who was very well acclaimed, because he was accustomed to things being done just so.
It was interesting. It's not the same directing as other shows. You didn't work with him. Because, number one, half the time you weren't sure what he was going to do. So it's intuitively I had to start realizing in rehearsals, I'd say, you don't like this speech, do you? Or are you going to get that? And he'd say, yeah, I'll get it. Or no, I don't like this.
And so there had to be a marriage of these two things.
That was really part of my job, is to try to intuitively figure out what he was going to do and then say to the writers, he's not going to do that. The other part was to try to say, what are we trying to say this week? What is it you want this show to be about? To focus.
Jay figured out what to do. He figured out, because he's very astute, technically astute, he figured out how to film it, how to shoot it, and he was always thinking editing while he was shooting the show. So it needed the two to be so successful, because unsupported, neither would have worked the way it did.
Phylicia was such a pro, theater trained, that she, when he would go off on a rant, some of which were brilliant, some of which were just Bill having fun, she would stay in the same position so she could be edited around. She would just hold her position, react. He'd go off for like a few minutes, 5 minutes, 6, whatever, and she'd pull him right back to story. And what are we going to do about Denise? What are we going to do about Denise? And so you could edit out whatever you wanted, because Phylicia was just standing still and reacting. You know, God bless her.
You had to be able to follow him. You had to be able to dance with him. You had to be able to play with him, because he was very spontaneous. But he would be right. You see, he would just. I never thought anything he did was incorrect. He was always correct. You just played with him. It might wreak havoc in the director's booth, but in edit, Jay could always bring it together, and there would be some great, marvelous stuff that could not have been written.
It was always right on the edge. Well, no, basically, I just did the first 3 years when I was very lucky because the kids were young. And it was basically, Bill's concept was the war between parents and kids, their kids. And so there were always stories, because he'd come home and say, he'd come from work and say, at home today, one of my daughters was opening all the box of some such because she wanted to find the little present in them. And so all these cereal boxes would be wasted. Well, we do a whole scene about that. And it had nothing to do with the show, but it was so familiar. We do a scene where Bill and Keisha would just sit down and talk about some problem in school. Nothing to do with the show. But it was so real, and you'd love to hear fathers and daughters talking, and the relationships where we carried the show. And then Bill came in one day and said, I want to do a lip sync to a record.
They loved that episode in which we sang "Nighttime is the Right Time." And little Rudy came down there screaming, "Baby."
And we did one of the funniest things I've had the privilege of doing, where the whole family lip syncs to a record. And I don't know, he was just so imaginative.
I'm always amazed when I go back and look at the episodes, because some of them really I'm not really conscious of until I see them again. And I remember, oh yeah, that was nice. That was really good. Oh, that was fun. You know, whether it was singing with Joe Williams or Stevie Wonder, or sitting on the couch with Bill eating cake and having it splayed all over my face at the end.
It was always exciting. Just every show was fun.
It surprised us. It was number one from the get-go, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was number one. It was the highest rated show of the week. And nobody I think NBC's prediction was that it would get like a 16 or 17 share. And the overnights the first night were 48 for Chicago and 50 for New York and 51 for LA.
Share.
And it was stunning.
It was a thrill, not because we were number one, but because American audiences were accepting a black family that wasn't like they'd seen, that wasn't from the projects or were smart, were educated, and there was no question, black and white, they were people.
Nelson Mandela said to me, thank you. Thank you. He said, we watched your show on Robbins Island. He said, I watched it with my guard, and it softened him.
Wow.
We actually stopped a rehearsal, went out on stage, and said, "Hey, Bill, come here." And we told him that you're number one. The first show last week was number one, and he said, "Wow, number one in our time slot." We said, "No, number one for the week." He said, "What? You're kidding? We beat 60 Minutes?" He was amazed.
And he said, "Call Camille." Call Camille.
He wanted us to call his wife because she wouldn't believe him. Yeah, so we had to call her.